Let me say something that might sound a little bit crazy. On the surface, the California housing market looks fine. Prices are still at record highs. There's no crash, there's no fallout, there's no boom on the other side, and everything feels stable. But underneath it all, the current market is being squeezed from 3 different directions, and most people do not see it coming at all. And the biggest trigger right now is not interest rates, it's not the low inventory, it's oil. And so today we're gonna get into the dark side of the oil war and how it relates to housing. And I'll break down how what's happening globally is hitting your wallet locally and why this current housing market is a lot more fragile than it looks. So let's start there. The market looks fine, but is it really? Median home prices in California are still hovering right around 900,000. That's the headline that people see. And because of that, they assume that there's no big changes, everything's holding up just fine, and the market is strong. But if you zoom in just a little bit, you'll start to see the cracks. Sales volume's actually down. Days on market is starting to creep up. Inventory is slightly rising, but also tight. And buyers are starting to hesitate. And here's what's really happening. The market is starting to split into 2. You've got homes that sit, and others that are selling in a weekend with multiple offers. Well, that's not normal, that's pressure building. And by the way, guys, if you are either buying or selling or looking to refinance and you want to try and make sense of this market and how it pertains to your personal situation, reach out to me. My team and I would love and be honored to help assist you as we have thousands of other families here throughout the entire state of California over the years make smarter decisions when it comes to taking out mortgage debt. We'll break down your options, your numbers, and how you can use this as a wealth creating event. And the information for how to get in touch with us is in the description, but you can also reach out to me directly on Instagram at Arjun Mortgage. It's me that answers my DMs. And again, I'd be honored to help in any way that I can. Now let's talk about the hidden supply problem. Everyone kept saying over this last year that homes are starting to hit the market, inventory is coming back, and the reality was, nope, it's not actually happening. But here's what actually was happening behind all of that, and that is the inheritance effect, otherwise known as the famous California Prop 13. Homes aren't being sold, they're just being passed down. And because property taxes stay low, there's zero incentive to sell. So those homes that we're talking about never actually hit the market. The other issue with supply is that people are leaving, but not actually selling. And you've heard plenty of it. People leaving California for Texas, for Florida, for Nevada, Arizona. But here's what they're not telling you. People are leaving California and making those moves for financial reasons, but they're keeping their California homes. Now, why would they do that? Well, one, they're renting them out because rents here in this state are obnoxious. And it really plays out well if you've got an existing low interest rate on your property or you don't owe any money on it at all and you can catch some nice rent for it. The other but more important reason is that they're avoiding capital gains. Because this has been such a fast appreciating market, anyone who would sell a home here is likely going to be hosed by capital gains. And so they'd much rather just hold on to that long-term appreciating asset, depreciate it for tax purposes and actually come out ahead and ultimately just not sell it. So again, the supply is just not showing up here despite all of that activity behind the scenes. And then the third component to what's really holding back supply is that rate lock effect. Now, it is not as prevalent as it was a few years ago where you had people really staying put in their homes because they had a 2 or 3 or 4% interest rate and they just didn't want to exchange it for something with a 6 or a 7 in front of it. It made no sense, especially considering that home prices had not really come down at all. But there are still a lot of California homeowners that have a 2 or a 3 handle when it comes to their interest rate. So it makes little sense as to why they would want to give that up in exchange for something with a 6 or 7 in front of it. So what do? They just stay put, or they keep that home and move on. Okay, so now let's get into what's really happening here, which is the oil war effect and how it's impacting housing. You have a global conflict, which leads to oil uncertainty, and then ultimately gas prices spike. And in California, we're already back well above $5 for gas. In fact, here in the Bay Area, just recently, I paid just under $7 a gallon for gas. Now let's translate that into real life. That's an extra $150 to $300 for most all households. And in a state that is already very expensive to live in some areas much more than others, that bump up is the difference between getting all the groceries that month or not. And also in most markets of California, you actually have to drive. And here's the part that nobody's talking about. Yes, people are going to continue to do it. They will pay the higher gas prices because what choice do they have? But it's coming from somewhere, which means it's likely directly affecting their future down payment because they have to drain it slowly, their monthly comfort, and it's affecting their financial confidence. And confidence in real estate, when it's the largest indebtedness that you're going to take on as a consumer, is everything. So if that starts to wane, it's not a good thing. So until the oil war sorts itself out and the conflict in Iran more specifically comes to some type of a resolution or an end game or a finish line, even if it's off in the distant future, but you can at least see it. Oil and gas prices are going to continue to hit consumer confidence here in California. Now let's move on to the silent killer. And this one's a little bigger in my opinion, and that is insurance. Climate risk, wildfires, natural disasters have all changed everything. And there's been plenty of them here in the state over the last 10 or 15 years. And so what has that done? Insurance companies have pulled out, they've raised premiums and made it nearly impossible to qualify for any type of coverage. I can tell you this from firsthand experience because where I live in Marin, where we've been for about 9 years, the last 7 years we've been canceled at renewal and had to find much more expensive insurance to replace it. And as a result of this, more and more California homeowners are being forced into the FAIR plan. And that plan is even more expensive in some cases. You get less coverage and a lot more uncertainty. Now, tie all of that into mortgages. You cannot close on a home that you have a mortgage on without insurance. So what happens? Deals are falling apart, qualifications are being messed up, buyers have to ultimately settle for a less expensive home to offset that difference, and some areas are just becoming categorically unfinanceable. So remember guys, at the end of the day, you're not just buying a home anymore, you're buying at the risk of that location of the home. Now let's connect oil with mortgage rates. When oil spikes, you get inflation fears. With inflation fears, you have higher gas prices, the bond market will then react, and ultimately mortgage rates will move. And here's the problem, guys. It's not just that mortgage rates are elevated right now, it's that they're really unpredictable. And so buyers have erratic behavior. They're locking, which is then leading to panic. They're floating, which is then leading to regret. Or they're pausing, which is causing them to overthink the entire market. And so as a result, deals are falling apart way more easily. You'll see headlines in the news about buyers breaking contracts or backing out of deals at a record clip. Now, some of this is due to the reasons that I just explained because of all that uncertainty, but some of it is also just due to the fact that they end up finding a better deal because there are sellers out there that are starting to get very desperate to move their home. The reason for that is when you have a market like the one that we're in, most people who are selling a home, they really need to sell that home. It's not like the COVID market where they would just put it on the market to test the waters of profitability and see what kind of a ridiculous offer you as a buyer might bring them. They really need to sell either because of a divorce or a job or a relocation or something going on. And so they get very nervous that you may not want their home, which means they are constantly sweetening the deal to try and get other buyers and bring activity to their property listing. And so that is a reason why some buyers have been breaking their contracts and moving on. So remember guys, on this topic of interest rate, it's not that interest rates are higher, it's that they're unpredictable. And that's what's really stoking a lot of the confusion and fear. So this is where it all comes together now, guys. I call it the triple squeeze. And that is because buyers are getting hit from 3 different areas all at once. They're getting hit at the pump, they're getting killed on insurance, and then they're also getting whacked on mortgage rates. Let me give you a real world example. A buyer who qualified comfortably 6 months ago now has over $1,300 in increased insurance costs, plus another $300 to $400 in monthly gas. Same income, same home price, but a completely different reality. So what happens? They end up having to refocus their entire shopping to buy a smaller place, which for many people doesn't feel good. It's like a major concession at that point. Or they're having to change location and move even further out away from their job to a less expensive market. Or in some cases, they're having to pause their home search altogether. So it's not that home prices are changing when you see all of this different kinds of behavior coming from buyers. It's the affordability that started to move. Now, everybody talks about 2 markets, and I kind of alluded to that earlier, but there's actually a third one, and I want to make mention of it here. You first have the hot homes market. These properties are move-in ready, they're priced right, and they move quickly. A very competitive space. Then there is the stale home market. This is overpriced, outdated, and the properties just sit. Then there is the invisible market, and this is the third one. These are the homes that never really truly hit the market. They're inherited, they're rented out, or they're held as second homes. And so that's the market that nobody talks about. The homes that never actually hit the market. Okay, so if all of this kind of negative and crazy stuff is going on with oil and gas prices and homes not actually hitting the market and being completely gridlocked, why isn't the market crashing? This has been a head scratcher for a lot of economists and YouTubers that have been putting out videos calling for the crash here in California, or a national crash, but specifically here in California. And look, the state has its problems fiscally with how it's being run, and there are going to be more stories on this when it comes to fraud, waste, mismanagement in local and state government. But there's a few simple answers as to why this market, meaning housing as it pertains to the state of California, is just not coming down anytime soon. You still have a severe housing shortage at the end of the day. Inventory is still very much constrained. You have wealthy buyers that are still active, and in a state where there is so much cash flushing around as a result of tech and how it spills into other industries, this is a huge catalyst for prices continuing to have upward pressure on them. And sellers are just not being forced to sell. So what do we get at the end of the day? Higher prices, fewer participants, and a very, very tight market that sometimes feels impossible to break into. So it's not that this market is falling apart or that it's coming down anytime soon. It's just kind of frozen or gridlocked. Okay, so all this information that you have now, what do you actually do with this? What does this mean for buyers? The first thing you want to do as a buyer is to underwrite your real life. Take into account all the things that you're spending money on. And then also factor in a lot of these expenses that are gonna come as part of the housing transaction, not just the mortgage, but the insurance, gas prices, your lifestyle. The next thing you wanna take stock in is job security, because this matters more than ever. What do the job prospects look like for you and your career? Are you at a stable company? Is there a prospect of the company going upside down or going bust? In startup culture, which is very prevalent here in San Francisco, this can happen. Things can be looking great one month, wild salaries, all kinds of optimism, and a tremendous outlook. And then on any given day, boom, you hit a wall and it looks like everything is gonna dry up. So in those tech-heavy markets, all throughout the state, make sure that you are paying close attention to your job security. Because at the end of the day, you're not just qualifying for your loan, you're qualifying for stability. Next, and this one is really, really important. And if you've worked with me or you're going to work with me, you know that I put this almost at the forefront of our conversation when we finally get to connect, and that is that you want to buy below your maximum approval amount. Approval does not equal comfort. Yes, mortgage underwriting says that you can take out a loan that goes up to 45 or even 50% of your income, including all debts, but I think it's safer to aim for 25 to 30%. The last thing you want to do is move into a house, feel house poor, and then having instant buyer's remorse. Because look, if you are one of the lucky ones to break through in this market, and it happens all the time, especially if you work with good people, you want to be proud of that accomplishment and not be feeling regret just months after the fact, because this asset is going to do well for you over the long run. The California market's unlike any other market because we also have the appreciation side of the equation. Most markets in the United States appreciate modestly, which means it's not something to really bank on. But over here, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, homes go up by sometimes as much as 10% in a year. And so a lot of wealth gets created in home equity that isn't really the case in other parts of the country. Next thing to consider, guys, is that insurance can be a deal breaker. So make sure you shop it early and you understand well in advance of going into a housing transaction where you stand and what your coverage ranges are. And lastly, guys, remember that timing matters more than ever. You can't be guessing when it comes to this market or just going out and shopping for homes and then all of a sudden saying, well, let's go ahead and get our financing in order. You wanna have all your ducks in a row if you're gonna go out there, because the opportunities, when they show up, are going to require some real speed and fast decision-making on your part. So in wrapping all this up, guys, here's the truth. The market is still far more complex than it looks. And if you're only out there shopping mortgage rates, you're actually missing the big picture. We, as in my team, are not just looking at your rates. We're stress testing your entire situation. Because as I mentioned, there's a lot more that goes into this than just the mortgage rate. So if you want help navigating this, reach out. Again, you can reach me at Arjun Mortgage on Instagram. I will walk you through it, weigh out all of your options, and make sure that you have a real partner in what is going to be one of the biggest decisions that you make in your lifetime. I hope this video was helpful and that you have some context around now how the oil war is actually impacting housing right here in California. I'll look forward to seeing you guys on the next topic.